Thank you for the full house. It's really nice, and thanks for spending the morning with me and not going to work, or like going for breakfast or something better. I guess we're going to be talking about, two things. We're going to be talking about courage, and we're going to be talking a lot about the sacredness of land. So I just want to make two quick kind of acknowledgements. One is obviously like the history of this land, and particularly this neighbourhood, is such a powerful and incredible place. So I'd really like to acknowledge the history and owners of the land. I'm kind of in Aristotle's school of thinking. Like, I think courage isn't really a thing in itself. I think the question is not courage itself, but the courage to, and what it is the courage to do something, or to do something in the right direction. All right, Bill, we're going to draw some real grim shit for a while. Let's talk about war. So my name is Stanislava. I'm a Ukrainian artist. I map how topography and landscape is changed by war and conflict. So I kind of make data sets, and I travel and I work on my own on the ground. And then I kind of make giant drawings and installations that kind of trace the data in a very beautiful way. This work started being a Ukrainian, I guess. So you can kind of see some of the data that I work with. And I'm very much an exhibition-based artist, very much a studio-based practice. I make everything with my own two hands, and it's, I guess it's kind of like a slightly old-school way of making. So I guess how I first started mapping is I was living in Tokyo, and I think it's such a beautiful kind of transient but quiet but hectic city, and it's I think a very beautiful place to drift through. And I started mapping myself in the city, and I guess I was in my early 20s and I was starting to travel a lot for work, and I kind of had nothing to show for it. When you're transient and you live out of a bag, I kind of started wanting to make these ephemeral things feel real. And it was very much like early 20s work. It was like me going out and drinking and mapping the next morning like what I couldn't remember, or me going to my friends' houses. And yeah, I think it was work that was kind of about, very much about joy for me. So this is kind of the work, and I make work with pinholes into paper, and I really kind of love working with nothingness, and that was a huge legacy of Japan for me, and Japanese architecture and like Shinto philosophy, these kind of ideas of ma, and that the empty space is actually what gives a space substance, and like a photo is not the photographer and the person, but the space in between, that gives it the substance. So yeah, I kind of started tracing myself. And then Ukraine was invaded, and I'm from the border, I'm from Kharkiv, and I can't tell you how much of a rupture that is, And, I think there's a tendency when we talk about war that it's like you're from a fucked up place and this is just what happens. And I just honestly can't tell you how surreal and completely strange it is when you're kind of, bilingual and bicultural, and suddenly, all these things that you kind of lived with in this totally harmonious way are suddenly kind of pitted against each other. And, it's as surreal as like New Zealand invading Australia tomorrow with no notice. And it was a huge kind of paradigm shift for me, I guess. And it's not something I ever thought I would see in my lifetime. So I started mapping, kind of not so much myself, but kind of a very personal mapping of the war in Ukraine. And it kind of coincided with me getting a really, really big commercial show. And I guess it's the kind of first bit where you talk about courage, because I felt like I couldn't make anything else except this show. And I felt totally terrified that nobody would be interested, in Ukraine, because the international media wasn't particularly interested in Ukraine, and still, isn't. And I felt like nobody would be interested in textiles, and, nobody would be interested in women's perspectives of war. And I was kind of wrong. And like the 8 months that I spent making the show, like day in, day out, and suspended my life, sold in like half a day. And I wish I had that headspace back from those 8 months, and I wish I did have the courage. And I could have had like muchos better Spanish or spent the time doing something like way better. So I made these maps, and the changing topography of the land is mapped in the textiles. So what I'm really interested in is the whole history of women mapping war through textiles, and this is what the works look like up close. So they're just millions and millions of pinholes. And I want them to be really beautiful, you know, and I think that beauty is just the sharpest tool in the box. And sometimes I really struggle with not feeling particularly modernist about that, you know. And as much as I kind of try and get around that, I still just want to make beautiful things in the world, and when I die, that's what I want to leave behind. But I also think we all have this kind of dinosaur brain where we go to the most beautiful thing in the room, and I don't think you can kind of get around that, you know. And whether it's at the art gallery or at a party or, you know, on Tinder or whatever, I think we just have these dinosaur brains that lead us to the thing. And I think it's such a powerful way and such a powerful like tool to use. So these works kind of don't reveal themselves until you see the titles, and that you see this is the changing border or a crater that's been made by a bomb, or like where a missile has exploded. And I like that double bluff. And I think my work is very much an anti-journalism practice. It's totally I guess it's denying the photojournalistic image. And I think while that has a place, you know, and the more you work in conflict zones now, years later, I think there's something a little bit preposterous about, you know, photojournalists coming in and being like, all right, like we want women and children and bombs dropping and the New York Times needs it on the cover tomorrow and I'm outie, you know. And it's kind of, it has a purpose, but it's also expecting to see a narrative and expecting to see an image of war. And I think in a lot of ways we're kind of tuned out to that, you know. And I think when you think about photojournalism as a canon, it's very much, you know, I think a photo from the Vietnam War isn't that different to a photo from the Afghan War or, you know, the Syrian crisis or from Ukraine. And I really want to communicate about war in a completely different way. And what is it like, you know, from women's perspectives, to not know the ground that you're standing on, you know, or how does it feel when it can be taken away from you or your citizenship taken away from you. And there's a really beautiful history of women, you know, art, like a needle and thread is the biggest like art supply tool that women have ever had, you know, throughout the whole history of the world to explain themselves and decorate themselves and their environments. And I think it's this really powerful, beautiful visual tension that women have carried, and I kind of really like to extend that with kind of ideas of data. So these are sonic maps, these are sounds. And kind of not long after Ukraine, I sort of went back to Japan, and I thought a lot about Fukushima and being in Japan at the time of Fukushima, and kind of how, not prepared I was for it, but how, I don't know, how equipped I was to deal with it. And I think it came with being born after Chernobyl in Ukraine, is, you know, you've grown up with the narrative and the paranoia of a nuclear space in your whole life. And I was really surprised how many of my friends, and even politically active or engaged friends, didn't really understand what a nuclear disaster meant. And yeah, I think it really prompted me to think about the two spaces, and that was sort of the two bodies of work that I knocked over after. So these are bags in Fukushima. And what's happening and fishnets. So what's happening in Fukushima in the nuclear exclusion zone is they're taking the top 15 centimetres of topsoil off, and they're putting it into bags, into these bags. And these bags form barricades, so they're, you know, as high as this venue and, you know, as far back and just infinite. And I was so struck by the idea of taking a landscape and putting it into bags, you know, like, and containing an entire horizon line. And putting also the earth under the earth for storage. It just seemed like all these really incredible new jobs for the human race that I was really overwhelmed by. So I guess that's what I mean to say we think about land as being this kind of neutral, hard thing under our feet, and I don't think we actually understand how malleable it is. So it was sort of really weird, and I approach working in conflict zones kind of like the opposite of a photojournalist, so I don't know what I'm going to see, and eyes open, mouth shut is my policy. kind of listen to understand, not listen to reply. And I don't book shows anymore, actually, as well. And a big part of that is I want to have an answer or even a question when I'm ready. And I might not make something for 6 years afterwards or 10 years afterwards, or I might make something like Ukraine really immediately. And in the kind of heat of the moment. But I think I've decided to give every place the room that it needs and the respect that it needs and the thanks that it needs, especially for the people that work with me and facilitate the work, and to give it a really appropriate answer. So I've kind of started booking shows when I'm about 50% of the way into the work, and then it's really good for me to have like the kick and the deadline. So I was kind of thinking about all these things, and as soon as I got into Fukushima and as soon as we got out of the car, these fishnets were just lying on the ground, drying out, and they were kind of tracing the contour of the land. And it's like everything I was thinking about just hit me over the head, and it was just the solution there was kind of lying there for me, and it's kind of amazing, and you have to sort of resist that for a bit, like that's too easy, that's not okay. But yeah, so I kind of made these data maps, which are fishnets, and I thought they were a really beautiful metaphor for the dual threat of what happened in Fukushima, as far as a disaster in the sea and also a disaster on the land, and the kind of the sea nets tracing the land, but also the fact that we're trying to contain something that's uncontainable, and it's like trying to capture it in a fishnet and everything kind of falling out. And yeah, I guess there's actually no cleaning a nuclear disaster, and it's just the absolute reality of the thing. God, I really struggle talking. I did this talk in Oslo the other month, and I just crapped on, and I realized it was like white on white, and no one could see anything, and they were like, yeah, very good. So these are the details of the fishnets, and that's what I mean. I want them to look really beautiful and really fluid and contain the data within that. And then I guess, full circle, I went back to Ukraine and back to Chernobyl, and that one was actually quite an easy body of work for me. But the thing with, like my background is in like graffiti and like being a really naughty kid and punk rock and stuff like that, and I come from a philosophy degree, and hence Aristotle and the courage, and I feel like I'm paying off my HEX debt a little. I'm like finally using it. But yeah, the data it comes from a completely different place, and it's something now I have to kind of figure out with every project, and every project's been really different, and when you work in conflict zones, the access that you have and the time that you have on the ground, the security restrictions that you have on the ground are completely different. So I've never been able to develop one way of collecting or working with data that I can apply as like a filter to the land. And all land is so completely different. And it's really great because I feel like I'm really, I'm learning a lot, and every mapping is really considerate of each place that I work in. So Chernobyl was really interesting. So I got access to Reactor 4, which is pretty bananas, but I guess because of the microsievert exposure that you get, your time working is really, really limited. And also because of kind of terrorist threats, there's no photography, there's no, you can't get a drone up in the air to make a mesh map or whatever. So Chernobyl was a really interesting show. I made a 7-meter long tapestry in the end, and we showed it like this, like in a museum kind of casing. And how's that white on white? What are you even drawing? It's just drawing white on white? What are you doing, dude? So it's a kind of continuous 7-meter tapestry, and what I got really interested in was not so much the land itself, but the memory of the land. So how does the land remember a nuclear disaster? So the way I mapped it is I made a grid across the ground, and I was really interested in, the memory. How do you remember radiation? So I mapped 3 different kinds of land. This one is unpaved roads, so anywhere that's raw earth, that's kind of absorbed in the topsoil, the radiation. The next level was roads built before 1986, concrete that was laid before the accident, and then the next ones were concrete laid after the accident, after 1986. And all those 3 types of ground have completely different readings of radiation, so obviously the ground laid after 1986 and concrete has the least. And I thought it was so amazing that it had this completely invisible layer to the landscape and this completely invisible memory that's there. And the really difficult thing about this is, so this is the whole, and then it goes backwards again. So it was just 6 works. So yeah, I guess it's also having the courage with shows like this that that's all it needs to be, you know. And as a commercial artist, it's really tempting to say it's going to be 20 works, or, you know, to stretch it out. So I've been really conscious that every show or every body of work is exactly what it needs to be, nothing more, nothing less. So I show 6 drawings a year. How about that? Yeah, and then this is my current body of work, which is showing at the end of May in Sydney, but I just kind of want to talk about it really quickly. So this is, I've been data mapping the Calais refugee camp in the north of France, and the evacuation, and the new topography that's created by the evacuation. So you can kind of sense everywhere I've worked, I've either kind of lived in or spoken the language, and France has been is a really big part of my life. This is the first data set. I've been tearing my hair out. That's why I'm not sticking around. I have to go back and keep doing the data. Nothing's working. But I guess this is what I mean when I talk about the memory of the land. You can see what's kind of been trampled in the evacuation. And Calais is this really interesting camp. It's one of the few camps in the world that's not regulated by the UNHCR or a local authority. It's not an organised camp. You know, people haven't been brought in and out en masse with registration. It's a completely informal camp. So people are coming from a lot of migratory routes around the world and trying to jump a ferry or a lorry going between Calais and Dover. And it's the shortest point between England and France. So it's kind of the safest route or the quickest route in a way. And it's a very industrial port, so it's kind of an easier place to maybe hide yourself. So what's really interesting about Calais is it's a mass of people who are travelling through the continent as undetected as possible, you know, and trying to not leave a mark or be noticed. But when that migratory path meets in Calais, you can't help but to leave an impact on the land. So, for example, this is a ditch going up a hill into a road that has trucks on it. So it's kind of a hiding spot that you can sit in and get like maximum momentum and the shortest run into a truck without being detected. So I guess this is what I'm talking about, and these are the areas that I've been mapping, and the small impacts on the land and the evacuation. So you can see what the data looks like. This is data that's been woven into Calais lace. And I guess Calais was famous for its lace borders, and now it's famous for its political borders. And I thought it was a really kind of beautiful and apt analogy for what that area is. And this is one of the first studies. So they're kind of broken fences and kind of medical gauze as well. Oh, and then I just went back. I just came back from Calais. I excavated 20 kilos of ground and got it back into Australia. Let's respect the sacredness of the land, eh? Yeah, I don't know how I got it through customs, but we're turning the whole ground into Terrazzo, and that's kind of the show as well. So I'm very interested in, I guess now working with ground directly and preserving what it is. And like you could see in my photos before, the ground is kind of all the places I've worked with, the ground has more information than anywhere else, you know. Like I said, in Chernobyl, you have to look for the invisible thing, and, you know, in Fukushima, you have to look for, you know, the indentations in the road and the clearance. And in Calais, it's like walking into Terrazzo that's just made of human remnants and objects. So we just collected 20 kilos, me alone, collected 20 kilos of things and hauled them back, and pulverizing them into this really beautiful material, which I guess Terrazzo, if you know anything about architecture, is a indoor and outdoor living material, which is exactly what a camp like Calais is. It's like a very exterior domesticity and living in public space. This is me in Paris. I'm going to get kicked off Airbnb so bad, but I washed all the gunpowder residue and washed all my shotgun shells and put vinegar on them in a bathtub in Airbnb, and I bleached the hell out of it. kind of talking about making 6 drawings a year and being really appropriate, and because I'm learning how to data map, and I'm still learning how to work in international relations, I'm being really gentle with myself, and I think in a way that takes a lot of courage, you know, to kind of also not go full throttle into something, or kind of be patient with yourself, to take your time and, you know, not do something that later might impinge you doing future projects, or, you know, kind of rush ahead or have an answer when you're not ready to have an answer. And I'm very lucky to have collectors and museums who really respect that. And the work itself, as you can see, like it's not, it's kind of a non-for-profit, essentially, you know, the good old like art non-for-profit highway. And that's good, and that kind of lets me be, I think, quite free in a lot of ways, and I really struggle with ideas of, you know, monetizing from conflict. And I struggle now seeing it a lot in the industry that I'm in. But because I work so architecturally and so much with textiles, I've been really lucky to have a lot of support, I guess, from different industries and taking on commercial clients. And it's really nice because I think also when you work with war and you're in a studio-based practice, it's really nice not to do it 16 hours a day, 7 days a week, you know, and keep your brain on other things. And I love working with people and in responses to briefs. And working with teams is actually really awesome for me, because my work is so top-down, you know, and so not, never prescribed by, you know, commission processes or by galleries or by dealers, or, you know, it's just I make when I make, and I put it out, and everyone has to deal with that. So I'm kind of bratty like that. So I've had, it's been really interesting for me to do commercial work, and the Louis Vuitton film last month, and I just kind of finished a global Nike campaign as well. This is some work for Chanel. This is a big one for Tiffany & Co. So it's actually really stretches me to make things for other people and think about other people. And that kind of inevitably ends up back in my work, which I think is a really beautiful thing. And likewise, I don't know if you know, I also do home jobs for my mates. So I've been a tattooist for 8 years, and I think it goes back to the time in Tokyo, and obviously Japan has such an incredible tattooing culture, but also I guess go way back to like being a punk kid and, you know, safety pin home jobs and stuff like that, which I think is just the best shit ever. And so it also became a way to, you know, like, I guess when you die with your tattoos, you know, you carry them with you, and you carry them everywhere with you. And that seemed like such a beautiful extension of that time in Tokyo and trying to make ephemeral things real and carryable. And I think it also goes back to me so much to the histories of women and decorativity and adorning ourselves, and, you know, kind of what we do as jewellery, as textile designs, we also tattoo, you know, historically in so many places in the world that tattoo ritually are women tattooing other women. And I think it all really goes full circle with the artwork as, you know, dot by dot, and the pain and the tension for something beautiful. And I love that also my art practice isn't necessarily accessible as far as ownership, but very accessible to anyone that wants to come to a show or come to a talk or buy a book. So tattooing became a really beautiful way for me to give drawings to my friends. Like, I can't even afford my own work, you know, like no artist can afford their own work. Like, I'd really have to save, it'd be a bummer. So it became a beautiful way, and collectors didn't want these, you know? Now they do. They can't have them. But also became a very beautiful way for me to map my friends' journeys back onto their bodies, and the drawings that the body makes back onto it. So this is my friend Emma. We've been doing her whole body for years, and it's just maps and stars and all over the whole thing. So it's a really beautiful process and a huge intimacy, and kind of in a similar way that it lets me be really considerate of the wearer. And at the end of the day, I don't walk away with the tattoo. You know, I don't live with it. So, you know, you have to be very, very considerate of the person and what their body is like and how they move and how they talk and what they wear. And that, I don't know, it's really beautiful to be stretched and met halfway and just talk. And because I don't take money for this and I don't take public bookings, I'm not a shop, and I don't think I could do good tattoos for people I don't know, because the reason I think they're so appropriate is because I know the people I'm tattooing inside out usually. This is on my best friend. He's the one that taught me to tattoo, and these maps, these are spider webs with maps of everywhere that's important to us up to that point hidden in them. These are tree rings and they're maps of a family on my friend Dell. And yeah, another person whose body I've been doing start to finish, which is a really beautiful relationship. And I think being outside of money is also a really powerful thing, and it's one of the best things I ever did as a creative person. For me, obviously the war work is very difficult and very taxing and requires a lot of, work on the ground. And there's no getting around the money and facilitation that data needs to happen. So tattooing's been a really beautiful thing to be completely outside of that, and a really beautiful challenge that you're not just providing a service so you're indebted to do something that you don't want to do. I think it's really important to do things for your community. I just feel like every group of friends, you know how you have like a doctor friend and you can call them and be like, I have a rash, man, what's going on? Or your lawyer friend and you're like, can I be topless in a car? Like, how illegal is that? And I just feel like every group of friends should have a chef and a lawyer and a tattooist that services the community and makes your wedding feast, and because they know you inside out, So that's kind of my little model for that, and it's genuinely one of the best things I've ever done as a creative person. And the people that are the least creative actually trade the best stuff, because it's not like, I'll just make you a ring or I'll just, tailor your pants. Like, people, like, they really kind of come up with, the best, like, road trips, or come to my nonna's house for dinner, and it's stuff that you could never buy with money even if you wanted to, and I think it's such a big reminder of the power of creativity and community. So if there's any, and it takes, do we talk about courage? You know how much courage it takes to do this shit? Like, this is really permanent, and I was solidly terrified for the first 3 years. I didn't even show anyone. Like, my immediate friends knew. Oh God, I the first time I did a face, I couldn't sleep for a week, Yeah, and it's good to be terrified, I kind of got to a point with doing graffiti when I was a teenager that you're almost like making cops chase you, or, playing cat and mouse because you're looking for this adrenaline, and how amazing it is to make an artwork under duress and do it well, and I think that taught me a lot about art making. And then it's almost like when that adrenaline went, I just kind of went into war zones and tattooing. Like, something's going on. Like, I think I'm a glutton for punishment or something. Like, I met this person the other day and they were like, I like your artwork. I went to school in England in the 50s, and when we were really naughty, they'd make us sit in the corner and pinhole, like, sentences of apology over and over to calm ourselves down. And I was like, oh my God, like, what I do is like a child's punishment. So I don't know, everything carries a tension, everything carries a difficulty, and yeah, I think everything carries a courage, and not just courage for the sake of itself, but a courage to. This is me, in case you don't know and you want to find me. Thank you. So I'm just going to repeat quickly the questions if I ever had another like job before being creative, and if it took courage to step away. No, I'm a brat. I never had a job. No, I mean, I started really early. I started when I was 14 and doing graffiti and creative things and little shows. And like no one on the internet knows if you're a dog. It was kind of like that. Like, nobody knew I was 14, so I could just do these little freelancey graphics jobs and send them off and just be like, in my parents' bedroom and stuff, doing it. No, so I think, because I started when I was 14 and had my first solo shows at like 17, 18, I think I was really lucky to kind of, I did a lot of shitty creative jobs, but I've always kind of freelanced. And I think I'm really bratty. And now, like, you get to 30 and you're like, what if this shit goes belly up and, like, I'm, like, not employable in any capacity. It's actually, like, really scary. Yeah. Thanks. Yeah, I'll take a pity hire. Thank you. Sorry, the other question was... So the question was about the Ukraine works and how the sonic maps were created. Yeah, I guess they were created through sound recordings of the war, and then kind of, yeah, you know, from the data visualization, the way it's graphed, I kind of made these really loose charcoal renderings of it, and then I hammered them into place. Yeah, I guess I kind of wanted to talk about, the show was called Surface to Air, which is the name of the missiles that were being dropped, and the missile that sank the MH17 flight over Ukraine as well. But it was also, I guess, about this kind of coming up for air and breathing and resilience. So that was sort of the dual thing of the show, and then hence why I mapped the surface of the ground and then the sound in the air. So it was also this kind of dual thing in recording war in both kind of spheres. Yeah. Yes, I might just repeat really quickly. It's about how you negotiate with clients to have creative freedom and do right by your work. Like, it's the really funny thing about working for like really top tier labels is they have so much respect for creative people. And I'm really not just saying that. It's like once you've been chosen, that's it, you know, and then it's just full creative and full respect. And I think, you know, obviously because the budgets are there as well, it just kind of lets things work really, really smoothly. You know, and I just honestly don't have a single bad word to say about any clients in that sphere. And it's such an, like, I've actually learned a lot of, in my art practice and managing my own art practice from just seeing that control, but also that freedom and decision making has been like actually really, really incredible. And I've always found that it's the clients like a little bit lower down that are like haggling on price and kind of undercutting you, being like, can you do what you do, but actually don't do any of that, you know, like, but we love you, you know. But I think it's easy for me as someone who works in conflict zones and has so much consideration for how that's done. So I think it's always been really easy for me to say, like, that's, given the nature of my other work, that's not the right fit, or that's not going to be appropriate or sit well in doing right by that set of work, which is obviously like always my first priority. Yeah.
Yeah, when you were talking about Fukushima and you got out of the car, I'm imagining you getting out of the car and you see the nets, and you know, creativity has to be a struggle, supposedly. I mean, it must take courage to actually go, you know what, that's the answer, or struggle with it for a bit longer. Can you talk about the process?
Yeah. Just repeat that. It's, yeah, how do you have the courage to also know when the answer's in front of you, or it's, yeah, the first thing instead of the struggle. It's difficult, right? Because I think creativity, sometimes we think we can't make it in joy, or, you know, that it has to come through a place of difficulty, or Epicurus is big on that, actually. Yes, philosophy degree. Because, you know, Epicurus says courage doesn't come from loving relationships. It comes through like a kind of journey through adversity, you know, and I think there's something really in that, you know. But yeah, it was funny in Fukushima because it's the first thing on the ground, and you're like, well, if this is it, like, I'm going to see some really more like mind-blowing, amazing things. And it was actually, yeah, for the rest of the day, nothing quite hit me like the rest of that day, like nothing hit me in the same way. And yeah, I think it just takes courage sometimes to go, the simple thing is actually the thing, you know. But I don't think I started working on that show or any works for about 6 months afterwards. I really sat with it, and I dreamt about it non-stop, like completely non-stop in the time between. And obviously I research a lot before I go, and from the eyes open, mouth shut thing, you research a lot after as well, because you see things that cue questions or considerations. And yeah, I really give myself a lot of time to make sure that that was the right thing. Yeah. Can I just
oh yeah, sure. Yeah, oh, wow. So my question is a bit more personal, I guess. Yeah. Have you ever been stuck, like really stuck along your career, like in a sense that you've been really broke, or you didn't know where to find orientation? And because I find you're quite a fascinating person, I would just love to hear how you dealt with it.
Thank you. I think sometimes I think when you get on a momentum and deadlines and expectations and you start to live for other people a little, man, like it's scary because you don't have that choice. You don't have the choice to just tap out for a bit or not be inspired or not be curious. I think I've always been really lucky that I've had curiosity about the world and like a really big hunger and thirst for information and like a really bad restlessness. Like I'm not in one place very often. Like 2 weeks is like a bit of a miracle. So I think that's let me have momentum and enough time out of the studio to kind of almost forget I'm an artist. And I find that really, really helps me, like just to completely forget that you make anything at all. And so when you come back to that space or that time, you really value it. Like I lived in Scotland for 4 months. I won quite a big art prize last year. And so you're completely isolated and you have 16 hours a day to make. And yeah, I found myself making in 16 hours there in a day what I'd make here in like 6. Because I value my studio time and I'm distracted, and it made me realize how much I appreciate distraction, and as a city person, to how much momentum it gives me to value the studio time. Yeah, but being stuck is really scary, and I think that's kind of my only advice is just to go out and forget that you even make anything, and we're artists or creative people. And that shit doesn't mean anything unless you're out in the world living and feeling and looking and not thinking about the art world or the practice that you do, but you're connecting with the world in like a more fundamental way to how you see it, Yeah. Does that make sense? Yeah. Do we have time for one more? Let's just do this.
So you've done your degree in philosophy and you've gone on to data mapping and topography. Would you be able to explain like that transition, like how you even learnt to map data?
Yeah, totally. So I think when I was doing graffiti, I didn't go to art school, right? And when I was doing graffiti, I kind of felt all this pressure to be like messy and colourful and like reactionary and like collaborate with others easily. I'm so not. And as soon as I admitted that and that I loved mathematical things and precise things and minimalism, it's when I started to make work that truly felt like mine. And it was all this stuff that you're not meant to be as an artist, or you're not, it doesn't fit the stereotype, But I started thinking a lot that the way I see the world, I think, is really fundamentally equal parts visceral and cerebral, and I think why I'm drawn to data is I just find data like such a huge form of poetry, that you can give so much emotion within maths or these really rigid kind of guidelines. So I think it was kind of giving emotion to data it felt so close to kind of how I sift and perceive information. I think kind of being interested in Tokyo and the metabolism of the city and the rhythm of the city and the growth of the city and my movements and rhythms of walking and the patterns of my behaviour within that city, I think were a really big catalyst. And then I think it was trying to explain how I felt in Ukraine, just kind of really tipped that. As like mathematical as I am, I'm not a data mapper, and I don't come from science or tech in any capacity. And that's good. I think it's good. I think it lets you have a fresh perspective on those things, And like I said, it's kind of let me be really appropriate to every place with every completely new method of data collection that I had to do. And it's just learning, it's been doing my head in for a week. There's a solution to the problem I'm currently working on in Calais, but it hasn't been a solution in software since 2014. It's regressed. So it's really amazing. So you're trying to find the solutions to come to the solution, if that makes sense. And because I don't come from that background at all, there's no one I can call and have whine about it or have a meltdown about it like I can with the art side of the practice. And it's good. I think it makes you really tough and it makes you really appropriate to do right by each place and communicate it properly. Yeah, should go to school for it though. Is that it? We've got, yeah. Thank you so much. Yeah.